All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's panel. Today we're going to be talking about travel in a post-pandemic world. Clearly, we're still in the midst of this global pandemic and the travel industry has changed dramatically, even in the past year, but more changes are yet to come. And today we have an amazing panel of industry leaders. We've got scientific experts, and we're going to delve into what post-pandemic travel will look like, whether that's business travel, loyalty, the consumer experience, and beyond. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Brian Kelly. I started a little blog in 2010 while I was a business traveler on Wall Street called The Points Guy, just to share my tips on loyalty. And it sort of took off. And 11 years later, we're now at about 100 employees. We reach over 10 million unique readers each month and growing rapidly. And we really cover the travel experience from the consumer perspective. So I personally am very excited to get all of the insights here today from our panel. And as a reminder, we're going to save the last 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have questions, don't put them in the chat. Make sure you click the Q&A button and we will get to them at the very end. So I'd love to just thank Hotel Business and Delos for putting this together. The coverage from this will be on Hotel Business on all of their social platforms as well. So if you don't already, make sure you follow them. Without further ado, let's get into our panel. We've got Brian DeCourt, who's the COO of Hotel Equities, Jim Alderman, the CEO of Radisson Hotel Group Americas, Peter Shala, who's the COO of Delos, and Dr. Zachary Pope, who's a research scientist. His actual title is much longer, at the Well Living Lab. So thank you all for joining us. I think we'll kick it off. And let's just talk about business travel for a second. I'm going to ask Jim, from your perspective at Radisson, I think everyone says business travel is not coming back. It's changed forever. We clearly see, leisure's up and, up in a lot of markets. Right. What is the future of business travel? And are we going to have to reclassify what business travel is to kind of count remote workers now who have extended stays while they vacation?
Yeah, I believe so. Business travel, I would say it's back. I mean, people are traveling for business. Certainly sales forces are traveling for business. And that's simply driven, by the need to make sure that your competition is not going to outpace you. Because the last thing that I can do is allow, all of our competitors within the hotel space to be out there reaching, new prospective owners and not have our team out there traveling. But you couldn't stop our team from traveling. And so there is a portion of business travel that's back today, back right now, as far as the fulsome, suite of everybody who travels and people, doing a New York, Atlanta turnaround for one day, which I'm sure you did plenty of times, Brian, in your past. It's that day trip stuff is kind of, you'd look and say, hey, that's an hour and a half to the airport. That's an hour before I wait. It's the flight, it's the car, it's everything. You're like, that can be a Zoom call. But as far as anything a little more meaningful, I think it's back. The larger segment of the business travel, the group travel is not back yet. But you're going to have to count the people who decide to remain off the grid. I know of an attorney for one of the biggest brands in the entire world who has basically done most of this pandemic from Fiji, and she's based in San Francisco and has been effective. I'm back in the office now and we reopened it. There's not a lot of people here. So, business travel is certainly stunted, but there's parts that are back and I believe it will always be back and we're going to be back strong, but not to the level it was before immediately. But I'm hopeful that it does return. I think that, we tend to have short memories on this stuff, and as we get out of this and feel more and more secure about not getting the virus, I think that it's going to be hard to keep people tied to their desk or tied to their camera at home.
Yeah, Brian, Hotel Equities, you have a number of different hotel brands. As you think about the consumer experience, I for example, we're still not in the office, and whenever I stay in hotels now, which I do quite often, I'm always like, oh man, I wish there was a ring light that I could get from the front desk, or having larger desks. So many hotels pre-pandemic got rid of the desk, the closet. It's an open living area because I'm curious to see with your hotel brands, Brian, are you changing the way the hotel room is set up or?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for having me, Brian. Excited to be here. And if I could, before I answer that question specifically, just to dovetail on Jim's comments, I think he's spot on. Portfolio-wide, we operate about 200 hotels across the country, both here in the U.S. and in Canada. And we're seeing similar trends. Certainly the leisure traveler has carried us through the summer and through the pandemic. But that Sunday through Thursday pattern is coming back with significance. And we're really excited to see that. If you take our portfolio in April of 2021 versus that same store comparison in April of 19, we hit 86% of our RevPAR. That is an incredibly telling number for us. We hit 90% occupancy as a portfolio on Saturday last week and a Memorial Day weekend. That's not just a leisure traveler. And so we are incredibly encouraged by what we're seeing in terms of travel trends. And I think if you pay attention to the TSA numbers and who's going through the turnstiles, you're seeing similar patterns. Relative to what's happening in the guest rooms, we operate across a number of different brands, and while we certainly defer to brands in terms of guidance around the types of questions you asked, we also have our own inherent policies, and we try to bolt those on to the brands that we operate for and do that in partnership. So there has been a subtle attempt to start to put some of those creature comforts back into guest rooms with really, really rigorous cleaning protocols in place. You'll continue to see that, I think, accelerate. We continue to evaluate what does daily housekeeping look like? What does our food and beverage offerings look like? Those seem to be two hot topics that you're going to continue to see more guidance on. We're really excited, hopefully in the very near future, to not have to wear masks throughout all the branded assets we operate. We do have a portion of the portfolio that's independent. We're able to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of how we pivot and kind of return to normalcy in those environments. And so really excited around the improved pace and our ability to go into the guest rooms and start to normalize the guest experience.
Makes sense. I want to get into, and Dr. Pope, I'll ask you this first. You know, in the beginning of the pandemic, obviously there's been so much we didn't know. And as we learn more about the virus, how it's transmitted, I do get a sense among some travelers that there is security theater in terms of, having hand sanitizer everywhere in the room, but, the virus doesn't really, transmit on surfaces. I would love your perspective, what we know today, and as we learn more about the virus, like what is actually needed to keep a guest safe in a hotel room?
Yeah, so first of all, call me Zach. No need for Dr. Pope. Secondly, I'll kind of break this down a little bit. Something that really stuck with me that Jim said is that people are quick to forget. And, I think that's true. I think all of us want to forget kind of how it's felt to be in lockdown and to then not be, and then to be in lockdown again. That's never fun. What I don't think we can forget is the science. I don't think we can forget about what the priorities should be moving forward as it pertains to what consumers want to see. If we're talking about the hospitality industry and we're talking about keeping rooms clean, for instance, yes, to your point, Brian, there's going to be some hygiene theater, but we really need to be good and go back to the science and talk about, okay, what is actually the most impactful? Right now, at least, is it cleaning the air? I would argue, yes, it is. I mean, I think that we need to be real here about how we better ventilate our spaces, which means bringing in fresh, often outdoor air, and really ensuring that space is able to be as diluted, for lack of a better term, as possible. Things like portable air filtration units are very impactful in that regard, especially in hotel rooms where oftentimes you can't really open a window, especially when you're talking your high-rise verticals. Like you're not gonna see that. Beyond that, yes. Environmental services crews. They're the bedrock of the hospitality industry, and there is going to be a need to protect them, and there's going to be a need to also educate them as to, okay, we need to prioritize X, Y, and Z, which, Brian, it sounds like you're doing with everybody across your many different pieces of real estate. So I think to answer it as forthright as possible, there needs to be a prioritization. That prioritization needs to follow the science, and the science right now says that we probably get more bang for our buck ensuring that the air is clean, and then disinfection of high-touch surfaces thereafter.
That makes sense. And so, well, speaking of air purification, Peter, Delos, there's been winners and losers in this pandemic, and I would have to assume Delos's business is booming because air purification now is top of mind for millions of people. Can you walk us through a little bit of the products that you're creating for hotels and what consumers should be asking when they stay at a hotel? Should hotels have on their website now the type of ventilation they have in the gym and the lobby, for example?
Great, Brian. Thank you. Air quality is obviously a key topic. It's a hot topic, not just in the hotels, but every sector. At Delos, we are happy to be part of the solution. There's no doubt, right? We've been focused on fine particle filtration for the better part of 5 or 6 years. So when we were approached initially by large public school systems throughout the country, with the posture of, the Delos is in the business of separating fact from fiction. I mean, it's amazing and even dangerous to us how many reckless claims were being made and continue to be made as it relates to air filtration units and the benefit thereof. Important to look at the mechanism of action and potential for release of harmful byproducts and things like that. This is a field that we've studied deeply and thankfully have been part of the deployment process for almost 200,000 air purification units into public school systems throughout the country. New York City, Chicago, LA, Boston, Miami. A lot of these public school systems needed the following recipe. Very cost effective and scalable. Wall mounted, not HVAC, because of course, breaking sheetrock and getting up into the HVAC is a lot more expensive, especially for older buildings. What we found is that the science argues for portable air filtration, wall mounted, in favor over HVAC or inline solutions in most cases, because you're circulating and cleaning the air closer to where people convene. That's very important. It's important, obviously, to make sure that we're not just testing things like, filtration efficiency on a factory line according to some rating, but rather making sure that when those filters are placed inside an air handling unit, when you consider pressure drop and a million other things that could affect filtration efficiency, that we're validating the efficiency of the whole device and not just the quality of the filter. Huge difference. Air is a hot topic. I think that one thing that the portable and the wall-mounted units do is offer transparency and a real powerful marketing lens, if you will, for guests of hotels or participants in group meetings in conference centers and meeting spaces, and certainly in many other sectors, when they can see it. And they don't have to sort of take the word for it that something is happening magically in the ceiling, but you have no visibility to it. It creates a lot more confidence. And so from a scientific perspective, from a cost perspective, and of course, most importantly is the science, is how effective are these things, right? But when you add cost and the marketing power, we certainly favor the wall-mounted units over inline units. And it sounds like the market is telling us the same.
Jim and Brian, do you got on the air purification topic, have you had to switch strategies, or are you seeing consumers kind of demand higher, purification in your properties?
With us specifically, so much of our portfolio is Country Inn & Suites, and you do have primarily HVAC units that are PTACs. And so, believe it or not, it's the one time when PTACs are favorable, because they actually bring in, especially the new PTACs, bring in a great deal more fresh air than a regular 4-pipe or certainly a 2-pipe system. So it kind of does a more thorough flush of the air quicker, which is what the airlines keep touting. But for meetings centric hotels where you've got gatherings and you want to sell the safety of the meetings, I think that the visible air purification unit is really the only way to go. I've read so much, and I have to confess, it's like being on CNBC, where I hold interest in the company, or I don't hold interest in the company. but I'm friends with Peter because I used to do some consulting for them a long time ago, several years ago. But they're the gold standard in this industry and in the real estate industry as far as the well building standard and Delos. No one's put more research, and when anyone asks me, I point them to Delos because everyone new is jumping into this. I even saw there that Fellows, who is like the shredder, is now labeled a purification system, and God bless them. I'm happy they have, but Delos has spent 10 years researching and perfecting this, compared to everyone else who's, kind of a Johnny come lately. It doesn't mean that they won't be very good at what they do as well, and certainly anything's better than nothing. But yeah, our guests are if you can advertise it and you can show it, it's gonna drive more traffic.
Makes sense. I think probably one of the biggest topics in travel right now is, passenger, especially on airlines, passenger misbehavior. Last week, we saw a passenger punch a Southwest flight attendant. She lost 2 teeth. There's, I think, a lot of factors leading up to it, right? Everyone wants to travel. Hotels are packed, as we discussed, high capacity. Rates are up, people's anxiety levels are higher. You're mixing people who are anti-mask people versus people in the North who've been living, and there's this culture clash. So we're seeing this kind of turn into a disaster in the sky. Is that happening in the hotels as well? Are we seeing the conflict between front desk agents and guests when being told to wear a mask? Or is this really a trend that's the industry needs to address? Or do you think this will, fizzle out?
Everything you just said is spot on and 100% accurate as it relates to, I think, what has become an incredibly polarizing topic. And having lived in Atlanta kind of through the pandemic and in Georgia and in a state that perhaps took a more progressive stance, we've often joked, what pandemic? And I don't say that to marginalize or we have certainly been affected in significant ways, But the reality is parts of the country, as you eloquently articulated, have handled it really, really differently. I think when you started to see some of the large box chain stores come out with guidance right behind the municipalities, there was a bit of hold your breath and let's see what some of our large brand partners are going to do in terms of guidance. And most of them, I think all of them, very quickly came out and said, hey, look, we're still in masks. And that all being said, there's a little bit of an asterisk that said, don't be the mask police. And so early on, there's no question the confrontations that you described, Brian, that we're seeing in the air absolutely were occurring. I think our teams have taken a bit more of a passive stance as vaccinations have gotten out and been more widely distributed. So certainly we encourage it. We continue to have the signage. We, as I alluded to earlier, have all the appropriate protocol in place, but we are not taking a hard line on masks for our guests.
Last night I was out in New York City and I went to 2 different bars and they asked for my ID, which I was very appreciative of, and also my vaccination card. However, I've never been asked at a hotel. Clearly, some states like Florida have now made it illegal for private businesses, or not illegal, you get a fine of $5,000 if you ask someone for a vaccine card. Why would the restaurant industry do it and not the hotel industry? Or is that something that's coming down the pike? Or, just curious on your thoughts on asking for vaccination at hotels.
We have not put forth a policy of that requires them to ask. It's it's almost a state by state, municipality by municipality thing, but being a 99+% franchised business over here, the owners are going to do what they want. Individual owners are going to do what they want. And we have many owner operators that still work their own front desk. And so, if they decide that they're asking for a mask, it's their property. We're trying not to get too heavily into being the mask police or the anti-mask police, but it's a tale of jurisdiction and municipalities. It's wholesale different in Minnesota than it was in Georgia, and certainly than it was in Florida. Politics aside, there are a lot of people who, take a look at what the governor of Florida, DeSantis, did and said, you know what, it worked. We're fine. We're back open. The coast is full. You can't get there. I'm traveling to Florida for the 4th of July for a vacation, and I can't remember the last time that I actually paid more than an employee rate because, Brian, as you know, we're fortunate enough, that's one of the perks of being in this business. You get an employee rate because you're an employee. And I can't tell you the last time I paid rack rate for a room, but I have no choice. When a hotel's, pegging at 90% 2 months out, you don't take revenue off the book. So I just go with full rack, and Florida's wide open for business. Barry Sternlicht said on CNBC, his one hotel in South Beach is setting records. So it's really a tale of jurisdiction. It's the hotel business is a hyper local business when it comes to decisions that are made at properties or made by an individual owner or made in the jurisdiction or the state. So it's all over the board. There's no cohesion to it, and there's certainly not internationally either right now.
Right.
Zach,
Brian, Jim, if I could I think Jim brings up a good point. I think it's going to be very difficult to get consensus in our space. I just traveled out of the country for a vacation, and I won't name the location, close, but not a U.S. territory. And they put you through all sorts of rigor in terms of getting travel visa. I'm fully vaccinated. They required that. You got to upload it. All this rigor, you got to get tested while you're there. Not sure anybody really checked it. And so I say that a bit tongue in cheek, but they put you through a process. It's become a bit of a revenue stream. And I'm not sure, I'm just not sure there's the kind of rigor that we think is happening in terms of how that data is being collected and checked. And I think when you talk about any type of global passport system, I know there was widespread discussion several months ago around somebody like Apple or Google or, kind of creating that within the health app and that type of thing. And maybe at one point, but I think from a corporate private sector standpoint, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. You start to get into HIPAA and things of that nature and shared information. I just think it's going to be really tough.
I don't think it'll happen, Brian. I really don't. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I don't think it'll happen because of the data privacy. It's really interesting that, within our company of, however many hundreds of employees that we have throughout the country, about 3,500 kind of corporate plus managed, how many HIPAA experts we ended up with. Oh, you can't ask me because of HIPAA. It's just absolutely not true. I can ask you. That's the rule. I'm allowed to ask you. I'm not, but I can. And I think it's more about the data leaving, especially on a global basis, leaving the United States. It's not gonna. No one's gonna get at the front of that train. I believe, especially not anything that smacks of a global passport really starts to make people a little bit nervous.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the data pipes. We don't even have a federal database of vaccinations in the U.S. Right? So there's obviously so many different challenges there. Zach, from a scientific background, I think communications during a public health crisis is key, right? And I think we can all say the past year there have been lots of different messages from the CDC, elected officials, local governments, talking heads, and it overwhelms consumers. Do you think, going forward, the topic of today is, travel in a post-pandemic world. Where can consumers, how should people be kind of interpreting the data in a way that makes sense for them to make the best decisions on travel? Just curious your thoughts on.
I mean, at the end of the day, kind of to split this up from the consumer perspective and then from the scientific perspective, I think from the consumer perspective, it really is what personal risk are you willing to handle, I guess, because we've kind of switched. And thankfully so, we've turned to the corner, if you will, on really needing to worry about such widespread infections, and therefore, if you're less risk adverse at this point, especially if you're fully vaccinated, there's really quite low risk. I mean, we have very safe and effective vaccines, which have been rolled out fairly well. And we're really in a new place, a place that I think is hard to imagine, especially back in December and January when things were so bad. So I do think that it is up to the consumer at that point to decide what's best for them. From a scientific perspective, which is not, it's not mutually exclusive. we as scientists need to get better about communicating. I think that's the first thing. And I'll be the first to raise my hand. Second, and we had this talk during last Hot Topic session, you know, the CDC is doing what they can, and I have nothing but the highest respect for the CDC, NIH. But at the end of the day, especially a pandemic, it requires a very nimble and quick approach to making sure the science is good. And I think one of the things within the Well Living Lab we've been able to do with our COVID program and what Delos has done with all the research they're doing is we've been able to respond quite quickly with our own research, by working with third parties to do very rigorous scientific testing to make sure that if we're going to put our names behind something, or if, you know, in the Well Living Lab, if we're going to suggest some type of intervention to really keep people healthy and well, that it is scientifically backed. And I think there is an advantage to being smaller and being more nimble. And that then informs, to your point, Brian, it informs the larger context. And you hope, even though your research, as it usually is, it's kind of a drop in the pan, but you hope that somebody sees it and somebody appreciates it. And you hope that that person is at the CDC and maybe it makes it into their guidelines.
Peter, could you mind sharing some of that, you know, what Delos has collected? And also, I think we're so myopic, or, you know, obviously COVID's a huge concern, but I think there are a lot of other benefits to this focus on cleanliness that are going to have positive long-term effects. You know, we saw the flu essentially go away this year. Curious your thoughts on, you know, what are we not focusing, by focusing so much on COVID, are we really missing a bunch of other things, you know, that we should be focused on? And, you know, kind of what the infrastructure that we put in over this pandemic, what are the positive long-term effects of it for travel?
Just unmute there. Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I guess deserves a moment on just a perspective about the overall category of wellness, not necessarily just health safety, and certainly not just risk of pathogen transmission, but you know, there was a powerful move into wellness as a category pre-COVID. In fact, wellness was and continues to be infused into, you know, just about every consumer product in one form or another. And I think access to data and transparency and real-time information about biometrics and sleeping patterns certainly helps raise awareness. What COVID has done, amongst the, you know, horrible tragedies and stress that the world has felt, but it certainly has changed behavior. First, by making people aware. You know, you asked somebody a year ago about indoor air quality as a category, and maybe, you know, 1 or 2 out of 100 people would have an opinion. I think, you know, today that's probably close to 100 out of 100 people are at least aware that air quality is important to human health and well-being. I think what has come out of this is a couple things, right? A is that, you know, our spaces matter to our health and well-being. And I think that raised awareness is going to be a long-term positive. It's going to be a long-term positive for the spread of disease. It's going to be a long-term positive for the prevention of disease, and certainly a long-term positive for overall healthcare costs, which we know is the world's largest liability. And so the habits that are being formed, the awareness that is being raised about the relationship between human body and the spaces that surround them, essentially the convergence of the health sciences and the building sciences, is a long-term positive thing if we can use this as a catalyst to drive change. Air quality, you know, there's so many things to consider in air as it relates to particulate matter and the relationship between particulate matter and cognition, on sleeping patterns, susceptibility to long-term disease. This is not just about contracting viruses. And when you think about things, even, for example, as I've used before, in the school environment, you know, there's been a need to upgrade air filtration in schools long before COVID. And now COVID is a catalyst to do that. And the benefits are going to extend well beyond this pandemic, are going to extend well beyond the reduction of a viral load and pathogen transmission, and into all of the other categories that deserve the attention and now are finally getting it. And that applies more broadly when you think categorically, right? It's not just air quality. It's the effect that light has on the body. It's the effect that ambient sound levels have on the body. It's the effect that obviously other methods of purification, when you think about water filtration and things, there are so many things that we have learned in the correlation between space and body. And I think that this catalyst is going to overall be a net positive, provided that we continue to use it, as I said, to drive change.
Peter, oh, sorry. You go.
I want to ask Peter a question. I love the fact that you brought up light, because I was wondering, is that going to be, we don't know the damage yet, right? Of an 8-year-old who sat behind a screen taking in the wrong kind of light for 9 hours a day. Those that were lucky enough to work from their back deck and use natural light and everything like that, that's great. But so many people were cooped up, whether because of weather and everything else, that, I mean, the light situation is as damaging. We're designing our new offices right now, and I've tried to point our team in your direction and say, look, the research has been done on the damage of the fluorescence and the LEDs and everything else. But I think that's something to expand upon, because that's the one that it's even more prevalent, and it's already been proven. You know, the medical institution, the doctors, the AMA has already said that light can be incredibly damaging and long-term horrible effects.
Yeah, no, look, the exciting thing about that is it's a relatively new body of work when you think about science and timelines. Research and is vast on air filtration and water filtration, the effects of impurities on the human body, right? Even things like ambient sound levels and their effect on stress indicators in the body. It's pretty long that the scientific community has been aware of that relationship and studying that relationship. But the effect of light on the human body is relatively new, and new in scientific terms is, within the last decade or so, right? Doctors recognized that our eyes are not just vehicles to see. They're also vehicles to tell our body what time of day it is. And we have our natural sleep-wake cycles, and we're supposed to sleep in complete darkness and raise in, increasing temperatures and gradually increasing light. And then highest, brightest light midday, high noon, that's sort of, 12 p.m. sunshine, amber glow in the afternoon as the sun sets, and then again, darkness. All of that is giving a signal to our eyes, which then govern things like cortisol production, melatonin secretion. This has got to do with energy and sleeping patterns, and certainly susceptibility to long-term disease. So what happened? 100 years or so ago, we not only built boxes around ourselves, but then started to rely heavily on indoor artificial light. And the result of that is our human bodies are not built like this, but we are walking around like it's a constant twilight. All right. We get far too little daylight during the day because we're inside, and we get way too much artificial light at night, especially after 8, 9, 10 p.m. when the lights coming into your eyes are telling your body it's 11 a.m., go outside, have energy, and you're supposed to be preparing for sleep. That can't be good. The good news about LED is LED does not need to be harmful. LED can be used to actually mimic those color spectrums. A wonderful tool to actually get the benefit of outdoor lighting and bring it indoors. But yeah, I can go on and on about that. Don't want to hijack the call on lighting, but it's an interesting category.
No, I think it's fascinating. Zach, curious, have you done any scientific research on this topic, and what can hotels meaningfully do without, that's not so costly to help people sleep better, see better, overall well-being?
Yeah, so before I joined the lab, we have done an office-based study based upon lighting and looked at its impact, among other things, on cognition, on performance. There's also been another study again before I joined the lab that also looked at this wake sleep cycle that Peter is mentioning. I think right now it's awesome that we're talking about this. We had a recent call where we talked about this, with partners to just kind of, what is the next step here? Because it is quite important. From my background, what Peter is saying really rings very true. There's a wealth of literature on how light going into the eyes then impacts, among other things, melatonin production, throws off things with regard to your circadian rhythm. It's all very important and interconnected. I think as we move forward, and to your point, Brian, I think that we really do need to think about, just like we have during the COVID-19 pandemic, what gives you the most bang for your buck to make your spaces well. So, we think so much about, how do we make people well within a space? Well, that starts with the space. So you need to make your space well so that the people are well when occupying that space. And so I do think, and I would agree with both Jim and Peter on this, that lighting is kind of the next frontier post-pandemic. And I don't think, to something that Jim brought up at the very start, I don't think that, while we want to have a short memory regarding all the negative things that happened over the last year, I think we want to have a long-term memory on the things that we're currently doing as well. What we've already talked about, portable air filtration, making sure that the cleanliness is good within that space as well.
We're going to switch gears, but before I do, Zach, I just have to ask you, I'm sure you've done some research on jet lag. Any tips from a scientific perspective for us, all of us are travelers and business travelers, on the best ways to beat jet lag?
I wish I had the answer to that. I could think of, a plane is an indoor space. So, that's maybe another idea as it pertains to lighting. I mean, you can't really get away from it there. Beyond that, it's essentially trying to mimic as best as possible the schedule for wherever you're going. Which isn't always fun because it sometimes means you have to stay up a lot longer, eat at different times, things like that as you're flying.
It is interesting. A lot of the new planes, the 787s and A350s, do have mood lighting that dims and tries to mimic the sunrise and sunset. And just a reminder to all of our participants, please, if you have any questions, we're going to try to dedicate the last 15 minutes to Q&A. I don't see any yet. I'm sure you have questions for this amazing panel. Put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them in a couple minutes. So I'm the points guy. I live for loyalty. I've made a business out of helping consumers maximize credit cards, points. I'm really curious how loyalty has changed in the hotel business. As we mentioned, hotels are full. Jim, you were saying, you don't even take employee rates. I do know from a consumer perspective, elite travelers now are going to hotels, and I'm a diamond and my free breakfast isn't there, no buffet. So there's friction happening where the business is back so much. Is loyalty in the hotel business in peril, or is this an opportunity to double down on that? And Jim or Brian, if you'd like to take how loyalty has changed and what you see as a future.
I don't think there's any question there is a significant, I'll call it a point backlog. And so you've got loyalty customers really across every provider that folks like us on this panel are accustomed to doing business with on a regular basis, who just didn't have the ability to burn points or take advantage of the loyalty value that these programs provide over the last 14 to 18 months. And we're starting to see, you talk about pent-up demand, particularly as it relates to the leisure traveler. Well, the reality is the point pushers, oftentimes, all of us, are road warriors by day so that we can enjoy the points on the weekends with our families and the ones that we love. And so I think there's no question that all of us will have to continue to reassess the value proposition that the points create. Points are burning holes in folks' pockets right now. People want to get out and experience. I think there is a supply issue in some of the destination markets because of the pent-up demand right now. So it's tough to get in. But what's also nice from an ownership standpoint, when you take a look at all the stakeholders, the reality is now all of a sudden, as you start to hit peak occupancies, your redemptions on those points matter. Right. And from an owner standpoint, you're going to see some pretty significant upside in the coming weeks if you're performing well. So look, whether it's bottled water in a guest room or the free breakfast, Brian, that you alluded to, look, Delta, and I was Diamond forever. I'm not even sure what my status or if I have status today is. They load the plane differently. My 17 and a half year old daughter flew down to see her grandparents in Florida over the weekend, and she's in 17B and was the last person to board and had to check her bags, and she was not happy. And so, Delta, who I think has done a great job, they're changing patterns and behaviors and customers' expectations for folks who haven't traveled are coming back to some of the new normal. Not sure any of us are prepared on how to handle that.
Yeah. Brian, you make a great point. So Brian Kelly, you know the way it works. If once, depending on the system, once you're over 90% or 95%, the redemption is at full rack that was coming in that night, or full house rate of that night. I don't want to get too technical for the people who are listening who are not hotel folks, but that for the owner is fantastic. That for those of us at the end of the year who do accounting on loyalty systems, it's tough. It's really one of the only parts of GAAP accounting where you use estimates. I mean, there's no other place where they say, hey, just take a swing at it. You know, I mean, you can't. So it's this loyalty accounting at the end of the year, you're going to look up and go, wow, the systems had to pay out full rack. I mean, just think about full rack in some of these places could be $600, $700, $800 on, resorts in Florida certainly over the summer, because they're already peaking at 95%. So that part's going to get really interesting. But I can tell you that an owner would much rather be taking that reward room when he or she is 90+% than 70, because then they're going to get $79, and that right now, you need half of that to actually clean the room with the way that that labor has gone. But it's going to be interesting to see. There's other ways to burn and redeem points that we come out with that can be more localized, restaurant gift certificates and things like that make it easy. But I think a lot of people are saving them up, and I believe that we certainly committed to loyalty systems and reward systems so many years ago that it's table stakes. I mean, if you ask any probably hotel executive, and they weren't speaking and weren't public, we're not public, so I could say it, that if we could all wave a magic wand and say, let's pretend that never happened, because in a lot of cases it's a discount program is what it is. And it's costly to the owner. I mean, it's, full 5% of folio when someone is, just chunked down $3,000 or $4,000 at the hotel at a resort. It's a lot of money for the owner to be paying out to be part of it. But in most cases, I believe that the cost benefit is there, and your loyal guest, your rewards customers are generally your most loyal guest, and it's been proven pretty much throughout the system that they drive more revenue per person than a non-loyal guest.
No question.
I want to get into the digital transformation. It can be said that, this pandemic has accelerated the rate at which people shop online, interact online, et cetera, 10 years, some people say even more. In the hotel space, is that true? And what are the trends you're seeing in terms of bookings? Or do you get way more bookings now digitally, or consumers more, like, what are the future trends here that people should know about, in the business as far as, the digital transformation?
Jim, I can kind of kick it off and
Sure.
Okay, 100%, Brian. Consumers spent last year absorbing more digital content than perhaps ever in our history, and that content was all driven by not only the online ability to book, but from streaming services, the YouTubes of the world. And particularly when you break that down, and Brian, you certainly know this better than most, but from an influencer demographic standpoint, and I've got a bunch of kids floating around my house, 100% of their content comes through digital media. So I think as all of our big brand partners completely continue to pour in big dollars in infrastructure into the smartphone applications and the ability to book in real time, no question that the quality of those landing pages, the ease of booking, the quality of the images, the ability to see a 3D or a live tour, that's where we've seen a tremendous amount of money spent over the course of the last 12 to 15 months, is tell a really compelling story in a really intentional way in order to try and differentiate your destination for the consumer who is shopping perhaps in a non-traditional way that's become very traditional. They want to hear views, they want to see what influencers are saying. They want to read or go see hashtags. Where can I go do my next Instagram post? And as we talk often, it's about the experience. So not only do folks want to experience, but again, Brian, you know this well, they want to share the experience and tell the world, hey, I'm eating here. hey, I just dined there. Hey, I just stayed here. I just jumped on this plane with my friends. And so everything is about telling that personal story. And the best way you do that is through really, in our opinion, really robust digital content.
It's
I think Brian nailed it. Brian Kelly, I think Brian DeCourt nailed it. It's what we still haven't seen enough of, and it's kind of a clarion call that really you'll see it. It will happen soon enough, but the technology to carry around a little DJI Osmo 2, which is on a gimbal recording at 4K and capturing stereo sound, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to very soon, and it's going to take some time, but I should be able to see the room. What room am I in? A live inventory, I know I'm going to be in 302. Well, what does 302 look at? I want to see what the room looks like. I want to see out the window. I want to see the neighborhood. That's the level that we're going to have to start to put forward, because if we don't, Expedia will. People with budgets that are 50 times what ours are I don't want them disintermediating us out of the space and taking all the reservations. Of course, we love all partners who book rooms, but those come with an additional cost versus someone booking direct through our channels or through our competitors' channels or through directly with the hotel. But I think it's going to be about content. People are going to want to see what it's like. The influencer thing, and that's awesome that you brought that up. I mean, we're driving influencers, into our hotels right now. There's with our Latin American portfolio. I mean, there are people down there. You look at someone like if Joe Rogan told people he was going to be coming to Minneapolis and everyone should go stay at the Radisson Red or the Radisson Blue because he's playing around the corner, he'd fill our hotel up. He's got 7 million some odd, people who listen to him. You go south of the border, there are people 6-7 times his size, but there are teenagers with 36 million, people who subscribe to them. That's an influencer. I mean, my goodness, that's 3 times the size of our loyalty program in the Americas. And that's the new frontier is the YouTube and the channels, and people want to be suggested where they can go. And it's one of those things where they look like me, they're like me. I would like the places that they like, and to have that kind of experiential suggestions appear on the websites. I think we're headed for some amazing new digital experiences on brand pages and on overall hotel pages. And it's really a way. I thought at one point in time that it could possibly disintermediate the brands. The internet could do that, but it's proven it's not happening. I mean, of course, there's the giant of Airbnb, and they sell something different. They're mostly about experiences and a phenomenal platform. No one can argue with that. But I think everything Brian said is exactly what needs to happen, what will happen, and the different way of traveling by suggestion. I get asked on social media, hey, I know you're in the business. Where would you stay if you were going to X city? And it's surprising that, I don't know why someone would necessarily listen to Brian or I about where to stay. We do know, but we're going to push you towards our hotels if you're asking me.
Yeah, I think it's refreshing that I think for years, so obviously I'm an influencer, have built a media platform, but the hotel industry, I think, was a little late to that game and thinking, influencers just want a free stay. And it's like, you're not understanding the platform. They are just mini media platforms, and you're selling, and you should, pay someone or work with them. Yeah. So anyway, it's for sure the future. As you look at TikTok, I mean, as you said, your kids are now growing up with they're not watching TV, they're on their phones all day. So to get in that space, it's, I think, a smart business decision.
Brian, I think Jim touched on real quick. So the real estate industry has always done this really well. Kind of how do they monetize website and interaction in terms of showing property, whether it's residential or commercial. And there's a product that launched a couple of years back that allows you to do a 3D image, to kind of Jim's point, that really walks you through. There's a couple companies who started playing in that space, but literally allows you to walk through somebody's home in a really, really intentional way to capture every view and every nook and cranny. It's being used in commercial real estate now already. It's being used to purchase tickets at large venues. I absolutely agree. I think you're going to see that technology resonate in with the Airbnbs and the short-term rental companies. And then very quickly, I think you'll see our big brand partners do the same thing. The ability to go in and see the fitness center, to see the bistro, to see the restaurant, the pool deck, all of the amenities, and see exactly what your view from your guest room is really appealing to the consumer.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how many big hotel chains I look and it's one, and okay, I want to splurge on this suite even, and it's one picture. It's like, you want me
And it
to,
may be stock imagery from
Yeah.
10 years ago,
yeah.
Right.
So,
which is
I
even
don't-
worse.
No, and it's what you got back to before, Brian said. It's not just that, but the websites at the beginning of the pandemic and certainly through it still said that we were serving breakfast. We
Yeah.
weren't serving breakfast. Our restaurants were closed. And as you said, some of the plats and frequent guests, or even the non-frequent guests,
Yeah.
showing up and go, "Where's my free breakfast?" And you just want to go, there's a little something going on right now that we're not allowed to serve food in open containers.
But it
things like that.
says, yeah. All right, we've got several questions coming in, so I'm going to toss this one out to whoever, Peter or Zach. What's the panel thought on providing third-party indoor air quality monitoring, or providing a do-it-yourself solution for facility managers to use as a tool? Or actually, anyone can answer these.
Yeah, so I can just provide, I mean, Peter's the best person to answer this. And it looks like there's a second question that's highly related. The best, probably cheapest, if you will, proxy for whether or not you're properly ventilating a space is to really look at carbon dioxide. A good carbon dioxide monitor, I wouldn't be prepared to speak on it, but it's under $1,000. I would shy away from the ones that are like $150. There's kind of a sweet spot there, but that's a good, I guess, do-it-yourself solution to kind of know, okay, is my space, it's the indoor air quality, because to Peter's earlier point, this transcends in infectious disease transmission and really goes into so many other aspects, because there's a demonstrated link between high CO2 in any type of space and cognition. Again, to Peter's point, with HVAC units, it's a little costly, but I think getting it checked out by the professionals that installed the unit is probably the first and easiest way to go about it, as it pertains to a DIY monitor of the HVAC system's performance. I mean, I don't think that I could adequately speak upon that, because we always go back to the individuals who installed the HVAC unit itself. So Peter, I'd welcome your thoughts. I already talked too much anyway.
No, not at all. I think you're spot on, Zach. Look, technology is catching up. There are some pretty good sensors that are well calibrated. But as you noted, Zach, it's tough to find a sensor that's cost effective right now that's going to give you readings for PM 2.5, PM10, formaldehyde, VOC, carbon dioxide. I mean, it just goes on and on. So finding the indicators that can troubleshoot, and carbon dioxide is a bullseye for that, right? That will look, if you're not doing well in that category, you're probably not doing well in others either. I think that's a good clue. Certainly a great place to hunt. But look, there's no replacement for real-time monitoring, and it is not going to take long for the industry to continue to innovate, especially with the focus the world has on this category now. We know that technology moves quickly when there's demand, and it engineers price down very quickly. So I think over the next 18 to 24, if not 36 months, we're going to see a flood of great sensors that hit the marketplace that are highly calibrated, highly effective, and we'll see price reduction come with that. So the time to start planning for that, certainly is now, because there are ways to get ahead of it. And if somebody put a glass of water on your desk and it was brown, would you drink it? No, you wouldn't, because you can see it. If you walk into a space and you could not see the air, you're just breathing it anyway. And I think we need to make that visible. And the way to make that visible is obviously the sensors. And I think when people start seeing this and we visualize the air quality, you're going to see even stronger demand for cleaner air.
Sure.
And Brian, if you don't mind, just to add on to Peter's really important point, one of the things that we've been thinking about within the Well Living Lab is, how do you put an action to that? So it's not only developing the sensor and developing the technology, which, although I'm biased, I think our lab is very much capable of Delos, they're very much capable of doing the same and validating those products. And so I think what we need to think about, though, is how that changes behavior. So it's one thing to report, parts per million for CO2, but it's a completely different thing to develop a dashboard, for instance, that says, hey, open a window if you can, of course, or do this, that, or the other for a facility manager that is able to control the HVAC, that is able to ensure that if there is portable air filtration in different rooms, that those are switched on and off as needed. The better part there is develop a sensor that automatically switches them on and off. And so I think that really, again, going always as we do back to the science has been so important, in how you develop the technology and the infrastructure there to then make sure that the consumer doesn't have to think about much, but they can definitely see you're putting a lot of time and effort into making your space as healthy as possible.
Makes sense. All right, our final question is from Richard Leon, and it's about cybersecurity. Clearly, the Colonial Pipeline hack made major news. There have been huge loyalty hacks. I guess, Jim or Brian, the question is, how is the responsibility for security shared between the hotel chain brand and then third-party management or franchisees, for example? Any thoughts on that?
Jim?
You want to take it? I mean, I can take it from our point of view. We are, I think the rigor that we have around our data protection, personally identifiable information, is as strong as anything for a number of reasons. Our data is in complete lockdown mode. We have no data that actually leaves the country, even though we're owned by a larger global entity, which is number 2 largest hotel conglomerate in the world. None of our data is available to them. None of our data leaves the country, including the people who warehouse our data and the people who touch the data in between the customer and, let's say, Expedia and us and the hotel. You may think that's 4 stops. In between there's about 7 other stops where that data goes. Okay, to Derbysoft or to Disco or to other people where that data is transmitted. And so, we've done a forensic of basically what you would think of as almost a supply chain. It's like when you buy a certain type of tennis shoe, people want to know that that you've had a fulsome look at the entire supply chain and know that they're not being made by 8-year-olds who are being paid 10 cents a day somewhere. And we've done the same thing with our data to make sure our data has no ability to leak out through a vendor, through a third party. As far as the owner has, of an individual property, has the duty of protecting personally identifiable data, but they do have customer data, they do have owner data, and it's a way to it's incumbent upon them to do it by law. California's law is a bit tougher. GDPR in Europe is a bit tougher, but there's this data privacy is going to escalate as even individual governments rule how the data of their citizens is treated. I know way more about this topic than I ever wanted to know. Sitting in this chair, I've always been a development guy and left that to someone else, but now I know a lot more about it. And I think that the ultimate protection of data, it's huge. I mean, the amount of information that we give as a loyalty member sometimes when you get, the surveys and the amount of data that they know about you, it's quite a bit. Although, as you know, there's a large percentage of Americans out there, and certainly global citizens, who put just as much data or more on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I mean, you can build a profile, and people often do, of somebody without ever meeting them. You can if they're really transparent out there on social media channels, a lot about them, probably more than they ever necessarily realize. And if you know that, I mean, through the election and everything else, and through the last election prior to that, we know how much Facebook has been scolded for the data that they capture. But that is something the hotel industry takes extremely seriously, because we're dealing with credit card data as well, and we take a look at driver's licenses and everything else. So it's one of the primary things that from my position and from Brian's position, we have to keep an eye on, because the penalties are gigantic if you stumble.
I think we're out of time now. I hate to cut this off. I feel like we could keep going all day. I just want to thank all of you for joining us. I know personally, as a consumer, I'm now thinking I wish I had glasses that could tell me the air filtration in each hotel. So
Right.
Peter and Zach, everyone, thanks for enlightening me on, the thinking beyond just COVID, what travel and health and well-being should be. So, and thanks to hotelbusiness.com. Go there for all of this content, and also Delos for sponsoring this panel. Thank you,
Brian,
everyone.
thanks to you.
Thank you,
for
Brian.
doing it.
Great job. Thanks, everybody.
Good to see you, Peter. Zach,
Yeah,
nice to
thank
meet
you.
Guys,
Brian,
Nice to meet you.
see ya.